Winter in the Wyoming Territory doesn't just sting, it strips you down to whatever you're made of. Ruth Brennan felt that with every swing of the axe. One more strike, even though her arms were rubber and her breath fogged out like ghost smoke. The log split. She stacked it with the rest, still nowhere near enough for a week. Behind her, the cabin was half a promise. Frame up, roof open to a slate-gray sky, walls gaping like missing teeth. January out here didn't forgive mistakes, and Ruth had made her share. Wolves had been circling 2 nights now. Ruth kept the axe high and her pulse steady. Survival was mostly stubbornness. A horse snorted behind her. She spun. On the ridge stood a rider cut out of the sky. Big man, good coat, better horse. He looked like someone who didn't belong this far out, where decent folks figured she'd already frozen to death. He swung down from the saddle without a word, walked past her, and started stacking her scattered wood the right way. Tight, cross-locked, the way a man stacks when he's known real cold. "I don't need charity," Ruth said, not lowering the axe. "Not charity," he answered, still working. Low voice, steady, tired in a place a night's sleep didn't reach. "A trade. I got nothing to trade." He looked up then. Gray eyes, winter sky gray. Weathered face, not old, mid-30s maybe. A gold wedding ring worn smooth. "I need a mother for my girls," he said. "You need shelter before this cold buries you." That hooked her breath. The axe dipped without her meaning it to. 1 month, he went on. Trial. You keep house, teach them kindness, reading, writing. Help them remember what a family sounds like. I'll finish your cabin. Pay fair wage. And after? Ruth asked. If it suits us both, marriage, legal, respectable for you. A mother for them. He nodded at the wood he'd stacked in 5 minutes, work that would have taken Ruth an hour. You're still swinging when most would have quit. That's all I need to know. Her eyes flicked to the ring he wore like a shackle and back to his hands, scarred, capable. Your name? She asked. Wyatt Cole. Everyone in Timber Creek knew that name. Quiet rancher. Kept to himself since his wife died. Never asked for help. Never caused it either. And if I say no, I finish your wood and ride on, he said. But you'll be dead by February. My girls will still be grieving. And we'll both lose what we might have saved. He pulled a bundle from his saddlebag. Bread, dried meat, a thick wool blanket, and set it on the ground between them. Think on it. I'll come back at first light. He mounted, turned, and paused. Out here, pride'll kill you faster than cold, he said. But so will trusting the wrong person. Figure which matters more. Then he rode off, hoofbeats fading into the wind. The wolves sang a little closer. Ruth stared at the bundle, then at the open roof and the darkening sky. She took the bundle inside. She didn't sleep much. At first light, he returned with a wagon stacked with cut timber and 2 small girls bundled in wool. Ruth stood in the doorway where a crooked canvas hung in place of a door, the blanket he'd left last night tight around her shoulders. Wyatt lifted the older girl down, then the younger. They stood close to him, eyes huge. This is Sarah, he said, a hand on the older one's shoulder. She's 8. And Hope? She's 6. Sarah had her father's dark hair and solemn face. Hope clutched a rag doll with one button eye. Girls, this is Miss Ruth Brennan. Neither spoke. They just stared like she was a puzzle with missing pieces. Ruth knelt, eye level. Morning, she said. Hope's lip trembled. Sarah's arm went tighter around her. We don't bite, Sarah said, brave voice that still shook. Good, Ruth said. Neither do I. Wyatt cleared his throat. Terms are simple. 1 month on trial. You keep house, teach the girls. I'll finish this. Roof, door, proper floor. $10 a week plus room and board at my place? $10. Ruth blinked. More than most men saw. After 30 days, he added, if it suits us both, I'll ask you proper. Marriage, legal and binding. You'd have my name and protection. They'd have a mother. If it don't suit, you keep the wages in the cabin. And if I say yes now and change my mind, then you leave with what I promised. A man's word is his bond. Judge a horse by its eyes, a man by his word. His mouth pressed tight like he'd heard those words from someone long gone. Hope took a tiny step forward, so small Ruth's heart cracked. Please, miss, we forgot what mothers sound like. Hope, Sarah whispered, elbowing her. It's true, Hope said. Ruth looked up at Wyatt. Grief lived in his jaw, quiet and stubborn. A man trying not to drown where his daughters could see it. 1 month, Ruth said. 1 month, he agreed. I don't cook fancy, she warned. We ain't fancy people, Wyatt said. Wouldn't ask you to pretend, she nodded once. That was that. Ruth gathered the few things she had left, an extra dress, her mother's Bible, the axe, and climbed onto the wagon beside the girls. They made room without touching her. As the wagon creaked toward the valley, the town of Timber Creek came into view. Warm windows, a sharp steeple against the morning sky. That town already buried me once, she murmured. Wyatt glanced over. Let him try again, he said. This time you've got someone standing with you. The wheels bumped over frozen ruts. Hope's mittened fingers brushed Ruth's hand, testing. Ruth didn't pull away. Sarah noticed and said nothing, but something in her face eased. Snow started falling again, quiet, insistent. By the fifth night, the storm found them for real. Wyatt's ranch house was modest, 3 rooms clean but cold. The girls shared a loft. Ruth had a small room off the kitchen. Wyatt slept downstairs by the fire like a man guarding his world. Days went careful. Ruth cooked beans, cornbread, simple stew. The girls were polite, distant. Miss Ruth always on their tongues. Ruth didn't push. She mended hems, braided Sarah's hair when asked, read from the McGuffey reader by lamplight. Wyatt worked from dawn until the light quit, chopping wood, tending horses, checking cattle. He didn't say much, but he fixed the wobbly chair, hauled water unasked, and one morning left a handful of frozen wildflowers on the table, brittle and beautiful. On the 5th night, the blizzard howled. Wind clawed the windows. Snow banked against the door. They huddled close to the hearth, girls in nightgowns, Ruth mending a sleeve, Wyatt carving a wooden horse for Hope. Sarah blinked awake, eyes on her father's hand. Papa. Why do you still wear Mama's ring? The knife stilled. The room held its breath. The fire popped. Because I wasn't there when she needed me, he said finally. I was 3 days right away chasing money we didn't need. Came home to a grave and 2 babies who didn't understand why I left. His voice was flat. His hands weren't. Sarah's eyes shone. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't hers either, he said, but I carry it anyway. Ruth set her sewing aside. Her throat scraped. Town says I killed my husband, she said quietly. Says I pushed him toward the mines because I wanted more than a poor man could give. He died in a collapse. They said God punished my pride. Her fingers knotted fabric. Maybe they're right. Hope slid off her chair and climbed into Ruth's lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. You're not cursed, she whispered. You're warm. Ruth's arms folded around her. Something inside her unlocked with a painful kind of relief. Sarah leaned against Ruth's shoulder. Wyatt watched, face set, eyes wet. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, the 4 of them sat close in the flicker of firelight, grief breathing the same warm air, healing in the same small room. Morning came muffled and bright, the world outside buried clean. When Wyatt stepped out to check the drifted door, the yard was a blank page. He came back in, went quiet to his saddlebag, and took out the gold ring he'd kept like a penance. He turned it in his fingers, the way a man turns over a hard truth, then wrapped it in a scrap of cloth and set it away. Can't build forward looking backward, he said. Ruth met his eyes and nodded. No sermon needed. The line they'd been towing had shifted. The arrangement was still the words they said out loud, but the work between them had started to sound like something else. Snow days stretched into clear ones. They learned each other's rhythms the way you learn a land, by walking it. Wyatt taught Ruth the language of building. Level, plumb, square. She took to the work like she had to the axe. Stubborn, steady, precise. Her cabin began to look like a place a person could live. Roof tight, door hung straight, floor laid smooth. Every evening they went back to his ranch, and each night felt a notch warmer than the one before. The girls bloomed under routine like seedlings finally getting sun. Sarah smiled more. Hope chattered like a river. They hovered around Ruth, braiding her hair, wrapping an apron string around her waist, pulling at her sleeves. Reading lessons happened by firelight with the McGuffey reader. Arithmetic with dried beans marched across the table. Geography was an old map with frayed corners and a finger tracing places they might never see but could still claim in story. One afternoon, Wyatt came in dusted with hay and cold. Need to go to town tomorrow, he said, already reaching for the kettle. Supplies. Ruth's hands hesitated in the bread dough. "You best go on without—" "You're coming," he said, not unkind and not asking. "Wyatt, that ain't wise. You're with me now. Let 'em see." She could feel fear crawl tight from her stomach to her throat. "They'll talk. They talk anyway," he said, calm as fence post. "Difference is, this time you won't be alone." Before she could answer, Sarah leaned around the doorway, eyes bright. "Can we go too, Papa, please?" Wyatt glanced at his daughters, then at Ruth. "All of us," he said. "Like a family should." The ride to Timber Creek was an hour of ruts and nerves. Ruth kept her breath even and her chin level, but when the wagon rolled onto Main Street, curtains twitched. Faces pressed to glass. The general store door creaked open on a sneer. Jed Murphy stood behind the counter like a judge with a ledger. "Help you, Cole?" "Loading up supplies," Wyatt said, voice cool steel. "Put it all on my account." "Everything the lady picks," he tipped his hat toward Ruth, "and fabric for dresses." "Good fabric." Ruth froze. The girls slid to each side of her, small hands finding hers with a fierceness that made her throat ache. Murphy's eyes narrowed. "That's so. That's so." Ruth moved through the aisles in a kind of quiet shock. Flour, sugar, needles, thread, telling herself her choices were practical, not dreaming. Wyatt added a bolt of blue calico to the pile like it was a fact and not a kindness. He paid without flinching. They stepped back into the street with crates in tow. A voice cut across the mud. "Cole." Warren Kent, banker's suit sharp enough to draw blood, smile like a trap. "Heard you're keeping peculiar company," he said loud enough to catch every ear in town. "Interesting choice." Wyatt set a crate onto the wagon bed. "Turn slow. My choices ain't your concern, Kent." "When the richest man in the territory keeps company with a woman of questionable virtue," Kent said, faux mournful, "it becomes everyone's concern." The ground seemed to tilt under Ruth. Blood roared in her ears. She made herself stand still. "You questioning my judgment?" Wyatt asked, voice not raised but carrying just the same. "Just wondering what your late wife would think." The street went very quiet. Wyatt's hands flexed once, then Sarah stepped forward like a stone skipping across a pond. "Miss Ruth is good," she said, small voice steady. "She reads to us." She looked up at Kent. "That's more than you ever did." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Wyatt touched his hat brim. "We're done here," he said to Kent, to the town, to the past. He helped Ruth up, settled the girls, climbed onto the seat, and flicked the reins. They rattled out of Timber Creek under a rain of whispers. Halfway home, Ruth finally found her voice. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "They'll make it worse for you." Wyatt's eyes stayed forward. "Actions speak. Words are win," he said. Time they learned the difference. That night a hush settled after the girls went to bed. Ruth sat by the fire, staring at the coals like they might answer the questions she was too tired to ask. Soft steps on the stairs. Sarah hovered in the doorway. "Miss Ruth, will you braid my hair? Like you do for Hope." Ruth blinked away the sting in her eyes. "Course I will, honey." Sarah sat on a stool, back straight, trust offered without ceremony. Ruth's fingers found the rhythm, divide, tuck, cross, muscle memory from another life. "You're good at this," Sarah whispered. "Had practice," Ruth said. "Used to braid my little sister's hair. Long time ago." "What happened?" "Fever," Ruth answered, quiet as a prayer. "She was 7. Sarah was silent for a beat. "I'm glad Papa found you." Ruth's hands paused. "Me too, sweetheart." She tied the ribbon and smoothed Sarah's hair with a palm. "Me too." When the house settled into sleep, Ruth sat a little longer by the fire. Peace wasn't a big thing that fell out of the sky. It was a small one that arrived like a chair quietly fixed, a doll mended, a hand held without being asked. 27 days in, she could feel the month counting down like a clock with a tender chime. Tomorrow would bring decisions. Tonight brought warmth enough to hope. Upstairs, floorboards creaked and stilled. Outside, the wind skimmed the eaves without malice. On the mantel, a folded scrap of cloth hid a gold ring that wasn't ruling a life anymore. And in the soft red light, the shape of a family began to look like something they could keep. The month moved like a slow river, steady enough that you didn't notice how far you'd traveled until you looked back. Ruth tried not to count days, but she did. 28, 29. 30 came like a held breath finally exhaled. That evening, after the girls were tucked into their loft and the house had gone still, Wyatt poured 2 tin cups of coffee and sat down across from Ruth at the kitchen table. Firelight flickered across his face, drawing deep shadows under his eyes. "Need to tell you something," he said. Her pulse kicked. She knew that tone. "Something heavy. I'm not just a rancher." He stared at the coffee instead of her. "I own the bank. Half the mines. Most of the cattle land in 3 counties." Kept it quiet. Silence folded around them. "You're the richest man in the territory," Ruth said slowly. "On paper," he answered. "Money didn't save my wife. Didn't keep the girls from crying for her. Didn't make me less alone." He rubbed the back of his neck as though embarrassed by his own wealth. "Didn't feel rich. Not for a long time." He lifted his eyes to hers. "Gray and steady. I need you to know before you decide. If you choose this life, you'll never want for anything. A house in town if you'd rather. Schooling for the girls. Whatever you need." Ruth stood abruptly. The room felt too small. She paced once, hands shaking. "You're offering me a fortune," she whispered, "and I can't even offer you a clean name." Wyatt stood too, but didn't reach for her. "I'm offering you a family. It's not just a name to me," Ruth said, voice tight. "To them, to the town, it means everything. They'll say I trapped you, married you for money. They'll tear us apart with their talk. Let them," he said. "I know the truth." Ruth's throat burned. "Do you? Because I don't." Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I came here for shelter or safety, or because those girls looked at me like I was their last chance at love and I couldn't." She swallowed against the rising ache. "I couldn't walk away." Wyatt stepped close, not touching, just near enough she could feel his heat. "Why me?" Ruth whispered. "You could choose any woman in the territory." "Don't want any woman," he said. "Want someone who knows what survival costs, someone who don't quit, someone who loves with her whole self, even when it hurts. That's you." Ruth looked into his eyes and found no hesitation there. Before either of them could speak again, soft footsteps sounded on the stairs. Sarah stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her face. "Miss Ruth," she whispered. "Mama used to sing to us before bed, but we forgot the songs." She hesitated. "Could you teach us?" Ruth's breath hitched. She nodded. In the loft, Hope was already awake, sitting up in bed. Ruth sat between them, pulling both girls close. An old hymn rose from memory, rough, unpolished, but full. "Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace." Sarah cried, then Hope. And Ruth's eyes burned too. But the sound that filled the loft wasn't grief, not really. It was remembering. It was belonging. "That's our song now," Hope whispered when the last note faded. "Yours and Mama's together." Ruth kissed their foreheads, stayed until sleep found them. Downstairs, Wyatt waited by the fire. His voice was low. "Tomorrow's day 30, Ruth nodded. "I know. If you want more time." "I don't," she said. "I want to say yes." Her voice trembled. "But I'm afraid I'll ruin everything you've built." "You've already built it with me," he answered. "Log by log, choice by choice," Ruth swallowed. "Ask me tomorrow, when the sun's up, so I know I'm choosing you, not fear, not loneliness, you." Wyatt nodded once. Tomorrow. But tomorrow didn't come the way they hoped. The town meeting hall was full that evening. Lanterns bright, air thick with judgment. Ruth had insisted Wyatt go alone. "Let them say what they're going to say," she'd told him. "Then come home and ask me." So he walked in like a man heading to his own hanging. Warren Kent stood at the front, voice carrying like a preacher's. "We have a moral concern. Wyatt Cole, our most respected citizen, plans to marry a woman of questionable character. A woman cast out for good reason. Are we to let such a person raise his children?" Murmurs swelled. Heads nodded. Mrs. Fletcher, the preacher's wife, lifted her chin. "Those girls deserve better." Wyatt's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but fear rose like a tide. He heard the town. He heard his failures. He heard the grave dirt in his memory. His throat closed. Kent smiled. "Nothing to say, Cole." Wyatt tried, but the words stuck like broken glass. He turned and walked out. The ride home felt endless. Each hoofbeat drove guilt deeper. Ruth stood waiting on the porch, shawl tight around her shoulders. One look at his face and she knew. "You didn't stand for me," she said. Not angry, not accusing, just truth. "Ruth, you taught me actions speak. Words are wind." Her voice stayed steady, though her eyes were breaking. "And you stayed silent." She stepped past him, packed her bag. The girls came running, nightgowns fluttering. "Mama Ruth, where are you going?" Hope cried. "Don't call me that," Ruth whispered. "I'm not your mama." "Yes, you are." Hope sobbed, clinging to her. Sarah turned to Wyatt, fury burning in her small face. "You let her go, just like you let Mama go. You're doing it again." Ruth knelt, holding them both like her heart was tearing in two. "You're good girls, the best. But I can't stay where I'm not wanted." She stood, walked past Wyatt, down the road, into the night. Wyatt didn't move. The door slammed behind him. The world went quiet. And that was the moment he realized he had just lost everything worth keeping. The cold night did not care about heartbreak. It didn't pause to comfort the grieving or slow its wind for regret. Wyatt stood in the yard long after Ruth disappeared down the dark road, frozen in place while the world seemed to come apart around him. Inside, the girl's sobs echoed through the house like a wound that would not close. Sarah's voice cut him harder than any blade ever could. "You're a coward." He didn't argue. Because she was right. The cabin he had built for Ruth, the one on the ridge, glowed faintly from the moonlight. It looked hollow now, like him. He walked inside the house, expecting to find his daughters waiting for him, but the loft ladder was already pulled up. They had gone to bed without a word. Or maybe they just didn't want him to come up. He didn't try. He sat by the fire, head in his hands, listening to the house settle around him, wood cracking, wind pressing the walls, the echo of a future he'd just thrown away. He didn't sleep. 3 days passed. Ruth had vanished like smoke. Wyatt rode every homestead route, every frozen creek bed, every line shack and miner's cabin. No tracks, no sign, no whisper of her. The girls moved through the house like ghosts. They didn't speak to him, didn't look at him. They sat side by side at the table, joined in their grief. A pair of small silent hearts he had failed twice now. Wyatt ended up where he always ended up when the world broke, at the cemetery. He knelt in front of the gravestone he'd avoided for 2 years, the one with his wife's name carved softly, weather already wearing down the letters. He took off his hat and held it in both hands. "I failed you," he said to the stone, voice splitting. "Failed them." Failed her. Wind brushed the grass flat. The sky stayed silent. "I've been living like if I chose anything. If I loved anything again, I'd lose it." His voice cracked raw. "I loved you. I still do. But you're gone, and I can't keep dying with you." He bowed his head to cold granite. "The girls need a father. Ruth." His voice failed, came back rough. "Ruth needed a man who would stand. And I didn't. I was there in body, but gone in courage." The wind moved. Not warm, not comforting, but listening. "I'm asking your forgiveness," he whispered, "and your blessing. To live again, to love again, to be who I should have been." Silence. Then, a meadowlark's song. First he'd heard since winter. Wyatt rose, put his hat on, and walked to his horse. "I'm going to fix this." And for the first time since Ruth left, he meant something enough to act. Ruth had not gone far. But fear can make a mile feel endless, and heartbreak can turn shelter into punishment. She huddled in an old line shack, no fire, no food, letting the cold do what the town had always said would happen. Maybe she believed she deserved it. Maybe she believed she ruined everything she touched. The wind screamed outside. Snow piled against the door. She curled under a thin blanket, waiting for sleep or death, whichever arrived first. A knock shattered the silence. Ruth didn't move. Another knock. Harder now. "Ruth Brennan," a woman's voice called, firm as a church bell. "Open this door or I'll break it open myself," not Wyatt. Ruth forced herself upright, bones stiff, hands numb. She unlatched the door. Moses and Martha Doyle stood there, an old couple from the edge of Timber Creek. Martha barreled inside immediately, shoving a pot of steaming stew into Ruth's hands. Moses followed with blankets and armfuls of wood. "Fool girl," Martha scolded, already building a fire. "Trying to die out here like some tragic heroine." "Eat." Ruth shook her head. "I don't—" "Hush," Martha said. "Not everything is about deserving, child. Eat." Ruth ate. Hands shaking, chest aching, warmth crawling back into her limbs. Moses draped blankets over her shoulders. "Wyatt Cole's been riding day and night looking for you," he said. "Man's half mad with it." Ruth stared into the fire, unable to hold that truth. "He had his chance." "Did he?" Martha said softly. Or did he have one moment of human fear? Ruth didn't answer. Couldn't. He's waking up, Martha went on. Question is, are you brave enough to let him try again? I'm tired of being brave, Ruth whispered. Moses leaned forward, voice deep and steady. Brave ain't the same as not tired. Brave is standing up one more time, then you fall. Ruth's eyes burned. What if I stand up and it breaks me? Martha took her hand, warm and sure. Honey, you're already broken. The only choice left is whether you heal alone or together. The fire crackled. Snowstorm howled. Ruth closed her eyes and saw Sarah's brave face, Hope's trembling hands, Wyatt's gray eyes the night he couldn't speak. One more time, she whispered. That's my girl, Martha said. Wyatt rode hard through the storm, chasing a memory Moses had mentioned in passing. The old line shack, the place men went when they had nowhere left. He saw smoke. He kicked the horse faster. Snow whipped his face raw, but he barely felt it. He reached the shack, dismounted, heart hammering. Took one breath, and the door opened. Ruth stood framed in firelight, blanket around her shoulders, cheeks flushed from heat and tears. They stared across the distance of everything they hadn't said. Neither spoke, then both stepped forward at once. They didn't rush into each other's arms. They didn't fall to the ground, sobbing. It wasn't that kind of love, not wild and burning, but something deeper, something steadier. They simply stood there, inches apart, breathing the same cold air, as if the world was holding its breath for them. Wyatt's voice was rough when it finally came. I should have spoken. I should have stood up, Ruth swallowed. I was ready to stay. I wanted to stay, but I needed to know I wasn't someone you let the world shame. He nodded, slow, like a man carrying the weight of every wrong turn he had made. I was afraid, he said, afraid of choosing wrong again, afraid of losing again, afraid of being the man I was when... He couldn't finish the sentence. Ruth understood anyway. But I lost you by trying not to lose you, he said. I won't make that mistake again. Ruth's eyes stung, but she didn't look away. You don't get to promise that just once, she said softly. You have to choose it every day. I will, Wyatt whispered. Every day you'll have me standing next to you. Ruth's breath shook, because this time there was no hesitation in him. Wyatt didn't reach for her. Not until she stepped closer first. When she did, he gathered her slowly, carefully, like something sacred. She leaned her forehead against his chest, listening to the slow, steady sound of a man who had finally decided to live. They didn't speak again that night. Some things didn't need words. Sunday morning. Church bells. The whole town gathered at the church, pressed into their best clothes, hymnals in hand, waiting to see how the story of Ruth Brennan would end. They didn't expect a wagon to roll up the main road. They didn't expect Wyatt Cole to step down, boots hitting the dirt like a man who had already counted the cost and was ready to pay. They certainly didn't expect him to. Turn and help Ruth down from the wagon like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. Gasps rippled. Whispers cracked open like gunfire. Then Sarah and Hope climbed down too, each taking one of Ruth's hands. The three of them stood together, shoulder to shoulder. Not as trial or arrangement or pity, but as family. The church doors were blocked by townsfolk, faces pinched, lips pursed, whispers sharp. Warren Kent stepped forward, surprised rage twisting his face. Cole, you can't be serious. This is a house of God. Wyatt didn't flinch. Then it's the right place for truth. Voices fell silent. Wyatt faced them all, his voice strong and steady. I'm here to make an announcement. Ruth Brennan has agreed to marry me. Silence. Then the outrage started like a brush fire. She's after his money. She's cursed. She'll ruin those girls. Wyatt didn't shout. He didn't have to. Go on, he said. Judge her, but judge me too. That stopped them. She has worked harder, survived more, and loved better than anyone in this town, he said. My daughters needed a mother. I needed someone who could teach me how to live again. She did both, Kent scoffed. She refused you twice because she wanted you to beg. No! Wyatt cut in sharply. I begged because I was the one who wasn't enough. His voice cracked the air. She could have taken the easy way. Could have married me for roof and comfort the first week. But she waited. Worked, earned respect without asking for it. A tremor moved through the crowd. A woman's voice rang out. She killed her husband. Before Wyatt could answer, Someone else did. Moses Doyle rose from a pew inside the church, old body straight as a fence post. Her husband died in a mine collapse, he said. A collapse caused by Kent Consolidated Mining. All heads snapped toward Warren Kent. Your bank financed the cut corners, Moses said. Men died because greed was more important than safety. And then you blamed a widow to cover your shame. Silence fell like snow. Martha Doyle stepped beside her husband. Ruth Brennan's crime was being poor and proud. Our crime was being cruel and calling it righteousness. Faces shifted. Eyes dropped. Shame spread like morning light. Then Sarah, small, steady Sarah, stepped forward. Miss Ruth sings to us. Holds us when we're scared. That's a mama. Hope's voice followed, soft but unwavering. She saved Papa, too. From being a ghost, the preacher, Elijah Hayes, old and slow-moving, rose. He looked out over the crowd, then at Ruth and Wyatt. I have been silent too long, he said. Love covers a multitude of sins, and shame belongs only to those who choose cruelty. He closed his Bible gently. If you'll have me, I'll marry you now. Here. Before God, and whoever is brave enough to stay. Some people turned and left. Not many. Most stayed. Wyatt turned to Ruth. Should have done this 30 days ago, he said. Doing it now. He took her hands. Steady. Sure. You're mine, he said, voice breaking just a little. I'm yours. Let them talk, Ruth laughed through tears. I've been sure since you stacked my firewood. Preacher Hayes raised his hands, and just like that, right there on the church steps, in front of the whole town, they spoke their vows. I do, Wyatt said. I do, Ruth answered. Wyatt kissed her, gentle, reverent. The girls cheered. The crowd broke into applause, scattered at first, then stronger, until it felt like the whole valley was exhaling. Overhead, the clouds parted, sunlight spilled across them like grace. Spring didn't come all at once. It crept in slow, the way forgiveness does, one softened breeze at a time, one patch of thawed earth breaking free from the white. But when it came with force. The snow melted off the valley like a long-held sorrow finally letting go, and green returned to the ground that had once looked dead. 6 weeks passed after the wedding. The cabin on the ridge, Ruth's cabin, was no longer just a place to survive. It had curtains now, a braided rug, a table Wyatt had planed smooth with careful hands, a stove that warmed the whole room, a rocking chair Sarah claimed most evenings while Hope braided and unbraided her own hair a dozen times. It had windows full of light, it had laughter, it had home. Wyatt split his time between the ranch house and the cabin, but more often than not, the evenings found them all gathered there, together. The girls loved the cabin's loft, where they could whisper secrets at night and peek through the slats to watch the fire below. Ruth would tuck them in, one braid, then two, kissing their foreheads, whispering something soft that settled them both to sleep. Sarah had begun to call her Mama without hesitation. Hope had always called her Mama, but now the word no longer trembled when she said it. And Ruth. The word didn't stab her anymore, it bloomed. One bright morning, Wyatt stood outside, driving fence posts into the thawed ground. Sweat gathered at his temples despite the cool air. He paused to look toward the cabin, watching Ruth through the open window. She was laughing at something Hope said, turning her head so sunlight caught in her hair. He leaned on the fence post, let himself feel it. For 2 years he had moved like a ghost, living out of duty. Now he was living out of want. Ruth opened the window and called to him, "Dinner soon." He raised a hand in answer. This was a life a man built, not one he avoided. Ruth had found work that fit her the way a quilt fits over tired bones. Wyatt had built a one-room schoolhouse on the edge of town. Not grand, but solid. Windows wide enough to let light spill across long benches. He had offered the job to her simply. "You're the person I trust with my children," he said. "That's enough to trust you with others." 10 students came. Ages 6 to 14. Boys who didn't know how to sit still. Girls who had never been told their minds mattered. Some parents whispered. Some frowned. But the children learned quick enough. Miss Ruth did not tolerate cruelty. She didn't raise her voice often. She didn't need to. Respect came like spring rain, slow, steady, changing the ground without thunder. At home, the girls helped Ruth plant the garden behind the cabin. Hope planted marigolds, bright and stubborn. Sarah planted tomatoes, quiet and steady, just like her. Wyatt worked nearby, sharpening tools or patching saddle leather, but always with one eye on the three of them, as if he still didn't quite believe they were real. In the evenings, the family ate at the big table, stew or roast or hot cornbread, and they laughed. Not loud, not wild, but warm. Full. After supper, Ruth pulled out the McGuffey reader. Hope curled into her lap. Sarah rested her shoulder against Ruth's. Wyatt sat beside them, arm draped across the back of the settle like he belonged there. Hope read slowly, sounding out each word. Sarah helped when she stumbled. Ruth praised every effort. Wyatt listened like the sound itself was the answer to a prayer he had once stopped saying. When the reading was done, Hope looked up with sleepy eyes. "Mama, can we sing the song?" Ruth met Wyatt's gaze. He nodded. So Ruth sang, soft and steady, "Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace." The girls joined in, high and pure. Wyatt joined last, deep, low, a grounding note beneath theirs. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't meant to be. It was theirs. Later, when the girls slept, Ruth and Wyatt sat on the porch. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. The night was warm enough for the first time in months, the kind of night that made a person breathe deeper. Wyatt took her hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Ruth asked. "For letting me build this with you." Ruth leaned her head against his shoulder. "We built it together." Log by log, they sat in quiet. Not the hard, aching kind from before. The easy kind. The earned kind. Ruth looked at the cabin, their cabin, filled with light and warmth and belonging. She thought of the woman she had been on that frozen ridge, swinging an axe alone. Then she thought of this. "Wyatt," she said softly. "I'm glad you rode up that day." Wyatt's thumb brushed her knuckles. "Me too." The prairie stretched around them, wild, wide, endless, unforgiving, beautiful. They had learned its language: survive, build, love. Nothing here was given. Everything was earned, and this family would last because of that. Summer rose gently over the valley, and with it came rhythm. Days fell into place like beads on a string, morning chores, lessons at the schoolhouse, evenings around the table. A life built not out of grand gestures, but out of small, steady choices. And yet the past never stayed buried forever. It came slowly, in small ways first. A whisper in the general store. A look held too long at church. A question Ruth wasn't meant to hear. Does Wyatt really love her? What happens when he regrets? Ruth felt those words settle under her skin, quiet as splinters. Wyatt saw it before she spoke it. One evening, he found her sitting on the cabin porch steps, elbows on her knees, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was sinking gold behind the ridge. He sat beside her without saying anything. Finally, Ruth said, "They still think I don't belong." Wyatt nodded once. "They're wrong. They think I'll take what you've built and ruin it," she said. "They don't know you," he answered. Ruth exhaled slowly. "Sometimes I worry they're right. Sometimes I think maybe I am what they say. Maybe I bring ruin." Wyatt turned toward her, voice steady as earth. "Ruth Brennan, you have built more in 6 months than most folks manage in a lifetime. You gave those girls back their laughter. You gave me back my life." She looked at him then, eyes wet even though she didn't cry. "That doesn't happen because you ruin things," Wyatt said. "It happens because you stay, because you try, because you love hard even when it hurts." Ruth closed her eyes. Let the words settle. "Besides," he added, a faint smile pulling at his mouth, "if you were going to ruin my life, you'd have done it already." That earned a laugh. A real one. Their hands found each other. No ceremony, no speech, just the natural shape of belonging. Meanwhile, Sarah and Hope flourished. Sarah, serious Sarah, had become Ruth's quiet shadow. Always watching, always absorbing. She picked up Ruth's habits, braiding her hair back before chores, folding dish towels with care, listening with her whole face when someone spoke. Her grief had softened into something wiser than her years, but no longer heavy. Hope, light and restless hope, carried joy like a flame cupped in 2 hands. She woke singing. She talked to chickens like they understood. She ran everywhere rather than walked. And when she laughed, high and bright, it filled the whole cabin. Once, a stray colt wandered near the fence line, trembling and wild-eyed. Hope coaxed it close with patience and a few apple slices. Ruth and Wyatt watched from the porch. "That one's got her mama's tenderness," Wyatt murmured. Ruth smiled. "That's not mine." "That's hers. It was always there. I just gave it room." Hope named the colt Lucky. The name stuck, but not all things in life grow easy. One hot afternoon, after lessons, a group of townsfolk waited outside the schoolhouse, arms crossed. Ruth stepped out, dust from chalk and children's footsteps still on her dress. The leader was Mrs. Fletcher, the preacher's wife, whose voice carried sharper than most. "We'd like to speak plain," Mrs. Fletcher began. "Some of us are uncomfortable with you teaching the children. Your past is questionable." Ruth held still. "My past is known," she said. "But so is my present," Mrs. Fletcher sniffed. "We just think a woman with your reputation shouldn't be teaching our young ones." Ruth didn't look away. "And yet your son learned to read in my class." That hit like a thrown stone. Mrs. Fletcher's face pinched. "That's not the point." A smaller voice piped up. Unexpected, small, but ringing. "It is the point." Sarah stepped out from behind Ruth, chin lifted. "Miss Ruth teaches us to be good, to be strong, to be kind. If you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who shouldn't be teaching us how to live." Silence stunned the air. Ruth put a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder, not to stop her, but to steady her. Then another voice came, firm, familiar. "She's right." Wyatt stood at the edge of the yard, sleeves rolled, jaw set. He hadn't raised his voice, but his presence shifted the ground. "Ruth stays," he said simply. "She teaches. She belongs here." No argument followed. Some folks left stiff-backed and tight-lipped. Some stayed a moment longer, eyes lowered, not in shame, but realization. Ruth watched them go, watched them stay, watched the invisible border between outsider and one of us shift, just a fraction. She felt her lungs expand. Slow and full, not victory, not vindication, something better. Home. That evening, the four of them sat on the porch, the valley lit in the gold of late sunlight. Sarah leaned against Ruth's side. Hope lay stretched in Wyatt's lap, humming nonsense sounds to the colt grazing nearby. Ruth let herself breathe, really breathe. She wasn't waiting for it to be taken from her anymore. She was living it. Together, chosen, earned, held. Autumn swept across the valley like a brushstroke, laying gold over the grass and copper over the trees. The air turned crisp enough that mornings smelled like smoke and apples, and evenings asked for blankets and warm hands held close. Ruth stood outside the cabin one early dusk, watching the light fade. The marigolds Hope planted were still blooming stubborn things. Sarah's tomato vines had gone wild in their wooden box. Wyatt was chopping wood nearby, slow and easy, not rushed the way he used to work. The girls were chasing each other in circles, Lucky the colt trotting behind them like he thought he was one of them. It was ordinary, and it was everything. The life Ruth had once believed she'd never deserve had come not in a sudden miracle, but in 1,000 small, steady choices. Work, care, listening, apologizing, trying again. Love had not struck her like lightning. It had grown like a cabin rises, log by log. One evening, the air turned cold enough that frost whispered across the windows. Dinner was eaten, the table cleared, and the fire crackled warm in the hearth. The girls curled up on the rug with their wooden toys. Wyatt leaned back in his chair, quiet contentment softening the hard lines of his face. Ruth looked around the room, and without meaning to, tears filled her eyes. Wyatt noticed instantly. "You all right?" Her voice was soft. "I was just thinking how close I came to missing all this." Wyatt crossed to her, cupped her cheek lightly, always careful, always reverent. "We both did." She leaned into his hand. The girls didn't look up, but they listened. Children always do. Ruth blinked the tears back, not from sadness, but from fullness. The kind that feels like a heart grown too big for one chest. Wyatt sat beside her. "Tell me what you're thinking." "That first night," she said, "when you stood on that ridge. I thought you were going to leave. I thought I was already gone." Wyatt shook his head slow. "I was the one lost. You were the one fighting to live." Ruth smiled, a small, strong thing. "We saved each other." Ain't that the only way saving works? He answered. Hope scrambled onto Ruth's lap without asking, head tucking beneath Ruth's chin. Sarah scooted close under Ruth's arm. Wyatt's hand rested on Ruth's back, steady and warm. No one spoke for a long time. They didn't have to. Winter returned. But it did not come like an enemy this time. It came like a season that could be prepared for. Wood was stacked high. The cabin was warm. The ranch was stable. The girls were stronger. The family firm. Snow fell thick and gentle one night, muffling the world in quiet. Ruth and Wyatt stood at the window with lantern light behind them, watching flakes swirl under the moon. Remember that first storm? Wyatt asked. Ruth huffed a soft laugh. I remember thinking the roof might lift off the house. I remember thinking I'd already lost more than I could survive, he murmured. Ruth slid her hand into his. And now? He looked at her, really looked, and his answer was simple. Now I know what I'm living for. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Me too. Behind them, the girls slept in the loft. Curled together beneath quilts Ruth had sewn from scraps of blue calico, the same fabric Wyatt had set in the store before the town had understood anything about them. Funny how the smallest choices become the ones that build a lifetime. In the spring, they planted again. The marigolds bloomed. The tomatoes climbed. Lucky grew tall and calm and loyal. Sarah grew wise and strong. Hope grew bright and fierce. Wyatt grew steady and open. And Ruth grew rooted. Home was not a place she found. It was something she helped build. Something they all held together. Something that held them. On a warm evening, months later, the four of them sat on the porch again, just like the very first spring. The sky was wide and violet. The air smelled of pine and sun-warmed grass. Ruth looked at the cabin, at the ridge, at the valley stretched wide, wild and unbroken. Out here, the land didn't give anything for free. You earned every sunrise, every harvest, every second chance. And that was why it lasted. Ruth took Wyatt's hand. He squeezed it once, sure and steady. Home, she realized, wasn't a structure. It was a promise. It was choosing each other. Every day, come storm, come whisper, come winter. They would keep building, log by log, word by word, hand in hand, together, always, the end.